Hi, I'm Randy Reed, Executive Director of the National Lighting Bureau, and we are broadcasting from the studio of one of our sponsors, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers in Washington, D.C. We're here for the 8th Annual Lighting Forum, and I am joined by Rajaram Bhagavathula, Research Scientist in the Division of Technology Implementation at Virginia Tech, and Dr. Ron Gibbons, Director, Center for Infrastructure-Based Safety Systems at Virginia Tech, and Bob Parks, the Executive Director of the Smart Outdoor Lighting Alliance. The name of this panel is titled Smart Technology for Street Lighting. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me, and I appreciate you being here. The first question is, what is smart street lighting technology? What's it mean?
I think it really, it's giving in capabilities to standard street lighting that they haven't had before. Things like dimming, responsiveness to the users, really being able to take lighting and turn it into a capability that responds to the needs of the city. So adding those things in, all of those controls and all that lighting management aspect of it really becomes part of the smart city technology.
So let's dive right in. When you say responsiveness to the user, what's that mean?
Well, you know, we've studied for years different lighting classes and application of roadway lighting, using roadway lighting as an example. There's things like when you're choosing the lighting level, pedestrian usage, for example, becomes a factor in that lighting selection. And so if you've got a city, we live in a city that has a football team, so every Saturday night there's 60,000 people in town. But on Friday night there's nobody in town. So do we need the same lighting level? So what we do then is just dim the lighting down when we don't need it, because we're responding to what the environment requires. Allows us to get rid of a bunch of the negatives of lighting. So it controls things like sky glow and reduces the potential for sky glow or the impact on flora and fauna, and even in a residential area reduces the impact of light trespass and some of those things.
So what are some of the major pain points in implementing smart street technology?
I mean,
there's significant
right tools
the
for the
tools
job because they're hard to get. And I work with small communities. I work with neighborhood lighting, and everybody would like to have smart controls, but to really get a system that has CMS and has all the nodes and the gateways adds $5,000, $6,000, $10,000 on top of the price of just the controls for each unit.
No, let's back up. $5,000 or $6,000 per city?
Minimum per installation.
Per installation.
But depending on the geography, if you need 5 gateways, a couple grand a pop, you're talking about a heavy infrastructure to start offering that node where my customers can't. I mean, we deal with 100 installation street light. I have to look for alternatives, and there are alternatives. They're all proprietary, which is a little worrisome, so we can talk about that later. So you can pick up an RF mesh system where I can program everything with a pad, and I can ripple it through the entire installation, so changes can be.
And that's relatively inexpensive, am I right?
That's relatively
RF,
inexpensive. $300 extra per node gets you into an RF mesh system.
Okay.
But that doesn't allow you to do a lot of what the cities want, which is the ability, like Ron was saying, I've got a sports event coming up, I'd like to bump that thing up. Well, I mean, if they can manage the iPad and go in and make the changes, then they could do that, but it's not designed, it's not user-friendly. So, I mean, making a user-friendly smart city control system is challenging at this point, and I don't think anybody's paying attention at the lower end. It's all about 100,000 installations where you have a CMS. And I mean, these guys are more familiar with that. I've never had to implement it.
We're dealing with large agencies. We're like Virginia, for example, we're dealing with them, and we're looking at statewide implementation of a control system. And so there's pain points there from the standpoint of cost. You're still looking at every little 7-pin node that goes on a luminaire is about $100. And the payback for that, we did a back of the envelope calculation. The payback's only about $10 a year. So the cost of that, you're looking at a 10-year payback for some of that stuff. Now, there's other things that are just strictly non-energy cost, but some of that is still painful to kind of implement. The other thing that Bob's looked at it, we've looked at it in terms of the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts. They went in, they were an early adopter, they've got a great system, and the technology they bought, the company got sold to another company. This company that bought them mothballed the whole system, so they're gone. And so Cambridge has to go back in and repurchase a control system because the people that they joined up with at the beginning are now gone.
Okay, about what year was that?
2014 was when everything started.
2014.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's focus on that for a minute. So in 2022, which is where we are now, if that same thing were to happen, could other companies come in relatively easy and have interchangeable software, or could the same thing happen again?
That's the big issue. That's the big issue.
And that's a problem because
Okay. So what I would think would happen is the city would say, well, we'll just wait.
well, everybody
Well,
is.
that's
We'll
what's
just
happening.
wait.
Everybody's
Because
waiting.
we don't want to be locked in.
That's the
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah, and you've got a lot of cities where they need to you got to have 3 bidders on every project and all these sorts of things, and all of a sudden when they make that relationship, they're tied in with that relationship.
But let's think about the big companies, the big conglomerates. This plays into their hand because they're not going out of business, and people know they're not going out of business. So I think that would be, they would almost have an incentive to not have industry standards.
But I got to tell you, it's not
Could
just
that
going
be?
out of business. Okay, so a system that I use regularly on the small scale, I think will be phased out this year. So they've offered it for 4 or 5 years. It's a RF mesh-based system, so I can do that control. Doesn't have a CMS, but it's eating into the CMS business. So from a marketing standpoint, they can decide to drop this, drop support for it. It's not in the catalog anymore. So all the installations that have been there, maybe you get support from them as long as they're still in business, but they're certainly not going to have any improvements and they're not going to advance it.
And that's the major issue right now is, in addition to what Bob has said, and Ron has mentioned, is unless the prices are not going to go down or you're not going to see the benefits on return until people implement them. If you don't implement dimming, you're not seeing the benefits in energy costs. So there's no return on investment for
So the dimming has to pay for it.
Yes.
And you're saying it's a 10-year payback right now.
That's a
Ballpark
back of
figure,
the
so
envelope
8, 12,
calculation,
12
yeah.
years.
If they dim.
If they dim.
So then the answer is it can't really be an energy cell. We have, as an industry, we have to sell more than the energy, and that can be safety.
there's
Crime,
safety.
perception of safety, crime, user comfort. Do people feel more safe? The perception is really important. I think at this point we're at a point where, in terms of crashes, we have to sell or we have to show that people feel safer to use these facilities when we dim them at night. I think that's the big point right now is the communities have to come in and say, hey, this is great for us. We love it. And that's kind of where the big drawback right now
But
is.
that's the rub, is that as soon as you talk about dimming, the fear of crime overrides the conversation, and it doesn't happen. I mean, we can name on, 2 hands max cities that have implemented dimming in the entire country. And Cambridge was one of them.
Yeah.
And it was a great example of it worked, and it didn't have any downsides. They dimmed 60% after midnight throughout the city, and nobody noticed.
Well, and that's the beauty of the human visual system
Yes.
is it adapts, and so we see by contrast. Actually, Raj is doing a big project right now studying crime and crashes. And if you want to fill that in, that's.
Well, before we go to that, I want to put you on the spot. How long have you and I known each other?
Randy, you and I have known each other probably 22, 23 years.
22, 23 years. I will tell you today, I feel less safe in cities than when I first met you. And we're 2022, we're in Washington, D.C., and last night after dinner, off the subway, going to my hotel, I did not feel safe. And I think safety is of greater concern today than it was years ago. So the question is, how are you going to overcome this dimming? Now, maybe you dim at 2 a.m. when most of the streets are empty instead of midnight when people are still out.
The interesting thing about dimming is that you're taking the entire lighting system down. So, if you've got a non-uniformity in the lighting system, that will exist in the high lighting system as well as the low lighting system. So you're taking that, so you're actually not changing the visibility conditions significantly from the standpoint of what we typically see by. Now, there's a threshold for target detection, things like that, but we're still way above that threshold.
Even when it's dimmed,
Even
you're
when
above
it's
the
dimmed,
threshold.
you're still above the threshold. That's what our evidence is showing us. We're not
Because
seeing...
it's contrast.
Yeah.
It has to do with
Yeah,
contrast.
so we're not changing the contrast when we dim. What we are changing is probably your comfort level. And so that's just something, but when we studied Cambridge, and I'll summarize some of that, we did surveys of Cambridge and said, well, are you worried about going out at night? In a town that dims, they're not. In a town that doesn't dim, they are. Because when you bring the dimming question in is what the results are showing.
Well, because it's never going to be dimmed in those towns that people are afraid.
Well,
Because you look at New York City, they did 240,000.
The city that never sleeps.
Yeah, they did 240,000 fixtures. We met with them when I was with IDA to basically say, look at all these cities that have implemented early adoption of LED, and they've done dimming, and they've reduced their energy by 50%. And this is a path you want to consider. And they basically laughed me out of the room. And they said, why would we ever consider it? We've never had anybody, no constituent has ever come up and said, I have too much light. Please give me less light.
That's kind of different, though. We recently are doing a testing where some residents complained that their lights were too bright recently. But I think that's a big question I think the big thing that we have to answer is, are people used to bright lights, and now when we dim them, people think they're not safe? Conventionally,
especially when they're overlit.
Yeah, especially, and that's the big issue. We've been overlighting our roadways and streets for a long time because honestly, we didn't have the technology to control or dim before, and now suddenly we have this beautiful technology that can dim, control, and you can only light the sections that you want to light. And we are not used to this, and how much of this is user comfort and acceptance versus how much of it is basically the things that we don't know before that we can do now.
History, because you look at a place like Chicago did a great job of reducing the overlighting. So they did a conversion, 380,000 fixtures, and they used warmer color temperature, and they reduced their lighting levels to technically IS minimums, okay? And people complained because of what Raj said. First of all, you're no longer, sometimes they were lighting keyhole to keyhole.
Right.
Now they're back to lighting the sidewalks and the street. People are complaining that they don't have light on their walkway and their porch because they used to have it.
Right.
So now they're feeling unsafe as soon as they leave the sidewalk. And the lighting level is so much less because in some places in Chicago, they were overlighting 250%.
Wow.
And it grew over time. It was just, we have a crime problem, double the light. And they had an administrative infrastructure that allowed an alderman to walk in and say, my folks feel unsafe, give me more light. They could have just put the lights in last month and they would get an allowance to boost it, come up another 30, 40%, make people feel good, and they get reelected.
We worked with a town where the town councilor came in and said, I want to be able to read the newspaper at night on this street corner.
No.
Yeah. And so they did it. And so they had 400 watt luminaires, twin pole, double 400 watt luminaires spaced 100 feet apart on a 30-foot pole so that this guy could read his newspaper at night. And so one of the problems with controls is it's confounded with the conversion with LED. And so sometimes we need the LEDs because the controls need the capabilities of the LEDs. Sure. But sometimes as you do the conversion, there's a color temperature change and some of those things go on. And so the whole thing kind of gets wrapped up and gets a bad rap because of things that are happening. They're just not used to it.
Even though that would be the perfect time to implement controls, because you overlit, you're going to bring them down, you're going to use the controls to get that ability to dim, and it should have worked well. But it's psychology. It really comes down to the fear factor.
So speaking of psychology, what is the favorite color, the favorite CCT these days?
For me,
Depends on who you ask.
Community-friendly lighting started preaching nothing over the 3,000 K. Okay, and that was 5 years ago. And at that time, that was a radical idea.
Sure, I remember it well.
My last 3 installations in rural Virginia, 2,200, 2,400, 2,600.
So is 2,200 considered amber?
That's
2200 is equivalent, basically equivalent to high pressure sodium.
which
So
is what people are used to.
that's what people are used to. So what we find from the research, and you want us to go down this rabbit hole, so we will.
Yes, yes, yes.
So our research shows that for whatever reason, 4,000 typically increases detectability of objects by about 20%. And that's using now the interesting thing is it's color related. So when we've done studies in the past Raj and I do a lot of studies with targets on the road. And when those targets are gray, there's no impact of color. But when we move to a colored object, suddenly 4,000 pops out. And this is what, 6 studies?
Yeah.
Okay.
We've
And
never had chrominance contrast.
we've never had these. We've never had color contrast
Yeah.
before. So we find that there's a benefit due to color. Through this 4,000. 4,000K seems to be a balance between red and blue. And so if we move to 5,000, there's too much blue, the reds fall off. If we move to 3,000, there's more red, and the blues fall off. And so, and sorry to say, 2,200, the whole world falls off when we get down to 2,200.
It's better than high pressure
Yeah.
sodium from a
It's
visibility
better.
standpoint.
Because the CRI is higher.
The
Exactly.
CRI is higher.
Yes.
So,
Go ahead.
So,
Right,
well,
come
what
here.
we're finding out, sorry, Raj, I keep, but what we find is that, so what we're finding is this benefit, but at the same time, we have to balance it. So we're actually evaluating lighting systems on about six metrics now. And these are outside of what we typically use. So we look at energy consumption, that's the first thing. We look at user preference, we use it at health of the environment, the flora and fauna, sky glow, and user safety. And safety includes security and all those things. So it's a real balance between those things. So in areas where safety is paramount, like a downtown core, where you've got lots of pedestrians and motorcyclists, and Bob almost got killed by a motorcyclist this morning, we would choose something that has a better detection distance. So we choose a 4,000. But in a residential area where user comfort and those things, the balance shifts and we move towards a warmer color because that's where the preference is.
And warmer 2,700 now is about the go-to. And
in my world, it's 3,000 for those kind of areas.
When we talk to communities and we do surveys, 2,700 comes back as half the people think it's too white, okay, and the other half want something like 2,200. Communities, especially small towns, historic areas, they do not want to go white, period. So, I mean, we found, I do a demonstration with 2,700 and people go, are you kidding me?
Too white.
Too white.
Yeah.
We could never have this. I'm doing custom fixtures for the town of Washington that are 2,200, and I can't get them in small quantities, so I have to build them to and replace their entire streetlight installation, which is all of 200.
I want to get you in here.
Yes. So, in terms of yes, 4,000 has a lot of benefits, and one of the biggest benefits that 4,000 has is that additional blue light that it has increases your peripheral detection of objects. So you can see pedestrians who are off the roadway are able to get in. So that's what at higher speeds we actually see a lot of benefits for 4,000 Kelvin. Although once we go down to lower speeds at 3,000 Kelvin, there's if you're looking at strictly four-wheel vision, that means objects that are in front of you, there's no basic difference between 3,000 or 4,000. So there's definitely traffic safe benefits. One of the biggest things that I've seen personally, and I've had complaints with 2,200, this was a couple of years before they were on the market, is that one of the comments I got was it has all the glare for the LEDs, and then none of the color benefits of the LEDs.
All right, I want to get back to the smart part of it. And you mentioned you can count 10 cities that are doing some dimming. Don't list the cities here, but what are the best practices? Is it midnight, go to 50%? What are the best practices?
Community-friendly lighting best practices are talk to the community. Okay, so you need to have a dialogue with the group that's going to live under these, because they're going to live under them forever. In the studies that we've done, just the surveys, they usually come back they would rather it dim after midnight. Okay, that's just in their mind. I'm not going to be up, I don't care, dim it after midnight. But realistically, based on IAS standards, you might be able to dim at 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock, because the quantity of traffic, the pedestrian to vehicle conflict drops off like a rock at that point.
Our approach is to really do city studies. When does traffic change? When do pedestrians stop? So looking at some residential areas, it might be 8 o'clock at night when we dim.
Okay, but I want to know, whatever that threshold is, whether it's 8, 9, or midnight, what do you dim to? And
50%.
Typically 50% or lower.
Right.
And then do you have another tranche later in the night?
Well, what I do is when I
don't know that one of the questions we are looking at right now is how low to dim before it becomes an issue for people. So I think that we are trying to answer with pedestrians and community residents is when will you start noticing it, when we start, because typically, as Ron said before, you don't unless you're literally looking at the luminaire, you will not see it dim to 50% or 40%. That's when it falls off. That's when your eye starts noticing the difference in the dimming. And the question we are asking right now with pedestrians is, how low can we go before you feel potentially unsafe, and then we can dim to that level, and then get all that energy saving benefits of LEDs.
Well, here, community-friendly lighting best practices are you have to light the areas that have the potential for injury and death. And that is crosswalks, that's intersections. And what we're seeing is in residential developments, there is just pitifully little light being addressed. I mean, it's not in those areas. People are dying in those areas, but we're worried about putting up beautiful, post-top lights throughout the community that have glare, which hurts with the visibility. So, I mean, we have to just rethink, and I keep going back as whatever we've been doing for the last 50 years, we had an opportunity when LED came in to change everything, because LED will do everything you want, and you can design a fixture to do it well, but you have to have the will to change the standards and the mindset of the communities that are relighting, because a lot of times that's the hardest battle, is that we can go in and say, okay, with the IAS RPA, you actually don't need to light this area. It's 25 miles per hour. And let's spend all the time and effort on getting to the areas that are causing problems, doing pedestrian safety first, which Raj has a lot of experience in testing. What do we do to stop those accidents? Because it's not because of the lighting, first and foremost, it's because of people not paying attention, distracted.
What is the future of smart street lighting?
It's
Ron?
you want to
I want to take that. Yeah.
go ahead.
All right, please, Raj.
I think the future, for the lack of a better word, is bright. But it's.
I don't like the sound of that.
But it has a lot of potential. We have a technology that can save lives, save energy, provide comfort, provide a sense of safety for everybody. But we have to take everybody's, we have to get buy-in not only from community, but also from law enforcement, because in a lot of these smaller communities, law enforcement plays a huge role in how much light the community gets. So I think getting buy-in from law enforcement, getting buy-in from community. The other important thing is the local government. I think being able to say that, we are able to get the buy-in from the local government is really important to be able to enable these technologies and see the potential benefits. If you only have this beautiful technology but only deploy a part of it and not see the entire spectrum of its benefits, you're not going to get the buy-in. You're not going to see it. So
when we do the surveys, we absolutely have to bring in police, elected officials, the mayor, whoever is in the stream of making decisions. You got to get them in there, because they're not going to have the same opinions as the IDA folks that want no lights. So you got this range that you have to thread, and where's the middle ground? And a lot of times that's the hard part.
What do you see as the future of smart street lighting?
Well, for us, we're working now with projects looking at smart cities and integrating the lighting into the whole smart city concept. Smart city is sort of a catch-all term for, I know where to park, so that I now have a smart city kind of thing. But there's a concept called the digital twin. And so what this is you you bring data from sensors into a central thing. And so you have a digital map of your city that says, this is what's happening in my city right now. And then based on that twin, you then can make choices that go out and you implement those in the real city. So take smart lighting, for example. If we link that into a digital twin concept, I'm pulling back data about pedestrians, I'm pulling back data about vehicles, and then I've got algorithms in my virtual city that say, this is how much light I need out there. And I implement it through the control system. So that concept of linking all those things together is where I see us going, is making the whole city responsive to the needs and to the use. So you bring up the idea of say a police response, and so a response goes into my digital twin, and an algorithm goes out and says, okay, turn on the route this way, and start playing around with ideas like you've got to evacuate a city, and there's traffic going this way, and I turn on the lights, and do people start following the lights? So if I train my city, I can start manipulating and really controlling where things are going by controlling the lighting system. So
that's fascinating.
A whole ton of opportunities there to sort of say, let's improve our whole way of doing things. Once we sort of build up this digital twin idea, and we can really have the city respond to the needs, and the smart lighting's part of that. So we're for example, Falls Church, Virginia, we've just kicked off a project with them to build a digital twin and build a smart city for them over the next 4 years, where we're implementing some of these opportunities.
Bob, smart street lights in the small communities. Where's the future?
It won't happen. And that's my biggest frustration. We've been pushing them for 5 years. In some cases, the person that wants LED lighting is the city staff, okay? They've got to convert over. And when you talk to them about layering on adaptive controls on top of that, their eyes kind of glaze over, and it's like, I don't really want to get complicated. What I just want is to save energy. And then you get into that, okay, I can save this much energy with LED. How much am I going to get if I put in controls? And I say, as long as you dim, and then that conversation drops like a rock. Right. It's like, we don't really want to dim, so what do I get? And I said, well, you get control. I can come back and make changes to the whole system, but can I bring in the lights up for a game, like Ron was talking about? No, not really. So then you're dead on arrival. And the cost factor is substantial. You're talking with an RF mesh control system, adding $200 or $300, and in some cases, it's only on the more expensive fixtures, so they're already going to have to increase what they buy. Right. That never makes it through purchasing. I mean, the bean counters will kill that dead.
We need to do a better job of quantifying some of the, like dimming, is one way to pay for it. There's benefits from a maintenance standpoint, for example. Hawaii, for example, is implementing one luminaire for the whole state. So they go up there, put up the luminaire. So you imagine you're a bucket truck operator, you're changing a luminaire. You've only got one, and you don't have to worry about what it is. It goes up, you snap in that controller. The controller sets the light level for that luminaire, and so that whether that luminaire is on an interstate or on a city street, it just adjusts based on what the controller tells it to do. So it's easy maintenance. There's things like that we need to spend a lot more time quantifying.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, thank you. I appreciate your time today, and I think it was a great discussion. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
As we're waiting for the questions, Ron, I want to ask you one question. This Hawaii thing intrigued me about one SKU. The question is, they could have a 70 watt for maybe an interstate and a 30 watt for a residential area. Do they dim those as well?
So yeah, what they do is once they establish the lighting level on the roadway, they put in they might put in say 100 watt on an interstate when they might only need 70. So what they do then is they dim down to that set level. But what they don't have to worry about then is the guy on the bucket truck saying, oh, is this a 30 watt, is this a 40 watt or whatever. They just throw up the same luminaire, and then the controller comes in and dims it down to the set level on the roadway. So it basically gives them a maintained level of lighting on the roadway. And it's regardless of what the technology is on the top. It's just they only maintain one luminaire and off they go.
Okay, I think it's pretty smart. Our first question comes from Thor. Thor, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so my question's related, excuse me, related to standards. And there was comments made about proprietary systems and systems that you can no longer update or purchase because the manufacturers discontinued them. So what standards are on the horizon that are going to help the adoption of smart street lighting?
There's a few coming. There's an NCTIP protocol, or NCTIP 1213 protocol that has a standard library of commands that you would want to have in your control system, like a reporting format for energy and things like that. So those are things that are coming. There's also a few smart city type organizations that are looking at standard communication, one called TALQ, TALQ, and a few others that are sort of trying to make all of these systems sort of interchangeable. It's a bit of a way off, but it is coming. Bob has a comment.
Yeah, I mean, there's some open systems, and I had high hopes with Bluetooth. Bluetooth mesh has been out for about a year, and there's hope that that would have been an open system, but most of the implementations are proprietary. So if we leave it to the manufacturers, we're going to get proprietary systems. So the only hope I see is if you can get a strong manufacturer that provides controls that plug into the socket, or are easy to implement after market, then you might have a system that would be open. And then whatever that interface is, whatever that software is, then hopefully you could change controls in the specific fixture to meet your needs, as opposed to be forced to buy a manufacturer's fixture just because they have that control. And right now, that's what we're seeing with almost all the RF mesh controls, is that they don't work and play well with anything. They are absolutely proprietary. And I've done installations where 90% of my fixtures were from that one manufacturer, and I couldn't even get an outboard external control to control some existing fixtures that I wasn't going to replace. So you end up leaving 10% of the fixtures off the system because the manufacturers decided we will not work and play well with others. And as long as there's financial incentive, that's going to continue to happen.
So I'm going to follow up on that. Actually, some work we're doing in City Falls Church with this concept of the digital twin. We're actually intentionally putting in two different control systems into the city. So we're putting one in one neighborhood and one in another neighborhood. And our goal there is to use this data exchange idea of the digital twin, where we're going to use APIs that are linked into those systems and pull data from those systems into our data management system, figure it out, and then through APIs send commands back out to those two twins and see whether we could make, or to those two control systems. So we're intentionally now playing around with trying to break down the sort of the silos that are existing in these lighting control systems.
Possible with a CMS and a large system, pretty impossible on small community-friendly systems.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're working with a couple different scales of technology right now.
Steve, we're going to go to you, and then Glenn, you'll be up next. Steve, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Randy. What would be the best control option for solar-powered street lighting?
I would go with a low energy use control that has a cellular connection back to a pole. The key there is low energy use. There are some systems, there's a few manufacturers right now that are actually coming from the battery controlled world, where they use battery controlled stuff that might be embedded in the pavement or something like that. They're moving into street lighting. And the value of that is because they come from the battery world, low power is their gig. And so that when you get into solar power, it's all about low power usage. So even the standby power is really low. And so that's what I would be looking for, is something, but without too much of an overburden for a node, or if you want to do a central node, then you want to have a solar powered central node as well. But there's lots of cellular connections. Just got to make sure they update. Their update speed is set low enough that they're not overburdening that power consumption.
The other thing I'd like to add is make sure that there's no trees around, especially once summer comes in and there's a lot of foliage. There's no sunlight anymore to charge anything. So that's the other thing to take into. I know because there's a light near my home in the US where in summer the light is basically doesn't function because it's full of trees. The solar panel doesn't see any light. So that's a big thing, especially if you live in an area where there's going to be huge changes in seasons, and then there's huge foliage changes across the year.
Glenn, you have a question. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Hi, Bob. Hi, Ron. This is, I guess, for Bob. In the beginning, you talked about how the cost of a wireless system or control system was prohibitive for smaller communities because of the infrastructure costs, the gateways, and having to have the sort of network operated by yourself. But what about the cell-based systems where you're just, paying a subscription fee per fixture? Is that still too expensive?
Well, you still have the CMS overhead. You have the subscription to the software usually, and what you do get by eliminating is the gateways, which can be incredibly expensive and very difficult to commission because you'll always need more of them than you thought you would need because of topography. So I guess it's better, but it's not, it's not for a small community. I mean, just the overhead of the CMS and all that. Maybe Ron or Raj know some less expensive options, but I'm blown away by the monthly cost alone of those systems. So that ends up, weighing heavily on the decision to go or not to go.
Glenn, some manufacturers build the cost of communication and cloud services into the cost of the node. So, there's one manufacturer I work with. I'll try to leave names out. That goes along, and so the node might be $100, but they for 250 they toss in 10 years of cellular service and support, and that gives us access to the cloud service.
Right.
And that's a pretty good solution even for remote locations. So if you've got one luminaire at an intersection in the middle of 10 miles from the nearest power, then you can do that and use that connection, so you don't have to get a fiber optic internet connection to it. So some of that's all built into the pricing of how it works. But the small communities, it can be a burden.
I think connectivity is. I think as Ron said, connectivity is a huge issue. If you are in a place where, like Blacksburg, for instance, if you're in the mountains, if the cellular pole can't access it might become a huge issue with delays and everything. So
yeah, even the carrier. We had a situation down here where we're doing a test system, and they came down and they had one carrier, and we were like, nope, that carrier does not exist in this town. And they had to go back and change all the nodes back to a different carrier change all the SIM cards and all the nodes because it just didn't work in our area.
that seems to be a major issue, especially with a lot of intelligent traffic systems that are going to be in place. That includes autonomous vehicles as well. Connectivity is a huge issue, especially once you go beyond the confines of a major city infrastructure. You're going to run into these huge problems. So I think these are big things that need to be addressed before these things become more present or more everywhere.
Is the threat of litigation a hindrance to smart cities? And I'll give you an example. There is a car wreck. Well, now there is big data out there that shows absolutely 2 streetlights were not working. And the city could be subpoenaed to get that data. And now there's proof. Is that a hindrance?
That's my retirement plan. No, it is an issue. So when we first developed the adaptive standards for Federal Highway in 2014, we hired a lawyer to come in and give a legal review. And so one of the things that came up was the fact that most agencies have sovereign immunity. So although they're changing their the issue's level of service. So if Arizona, for example, they used to put fences along every road, and so that fence was established the level of service that they were providing to the roadway users. So that fence blocked, and then there's a crash, a horse jumps the fence and is standing in the road, and the crash happens. Well, then state of Arizona could be sued because the fence broke and they changed their level of service. And so that's an issue that we're dealing with the agencies. Most have sovereign immunity, in which case the blowback will be coming back to the design engineer. And so, sort of use Glenn Heinmiller as an example, it'll blow back to the Glenn Heinmillers of the world who designed the system in the first place. So our recommendation in that report was document, and make sure you have justification for the lighting levels that you selected, because that's your protection against the potential liabilities.
Back when I was at IDA, we had the benefit of a lawyer who was willing to do a document search and come up with a kind of a summary of what legal actions had been implemented and what the results were. And they found that it's astounding, like 90% of the lawsuits are ambulance chasers. And they are specifically looking for, okay, there was an accident, this light was out, go to the city, demand money. And what we also found is they don't go to trial. They basically, the city, to avoid a nuisance and a potential high settlement, will write checks. And that is actually encouraging that practice. And it's big cities, small cities alike. I mean, we know that New York City has a large annual fee, which is just writing checks to lawyers. So yes, if maintenance is faulty, the chance of success is incredibly high. But if it's about, we don't have enough light on this road, the chance of any legal action succeeding is very low, because it's once you provide light for an area, parking lot, road, whatever, you have to maintain it. If you don't maintain it, then the implication is that you've been negligent.
Okay, and last question, we'll kind of wrap up here. Who owns the data? Does the city own it? Does the manufacturer own it? Does the light control company own it? Who owns that?
Maybe all of the above. Depends on how it's implemented.
Yeah, depends on the implementation. For a smart city digital kind of thing, at the end of the day, we believe the city owns it. So it's their data. They've collected it on sensors in their jurisdiction, and they've used it and implemented it. So that comes through, and the city owns that data block. The light manufacturer and the controls manufacturers are basically conduits of that data to the city's repository, is our belief.
And most of the cities, go ahead, Raj.
I was saying, yeah, a lot of these manufacturers are actually, cities are really interested in collecting this data, especially from as we are transitioning to more of these smart city technologies. A lot of these cities, like, even though they don't know what to do with it, they want to hold on this data, and maybe not right now, but in the next couple of years, we should be able to find multiple applications. Ron already talked about the digital twin concept. So it's going to be a lot of use cases to test, especially if you want to launch new implementations, or we want to test implementations. There's all this data that you've saved up. It's going to be a huge powerhouse to do a lot of machine learning on, to figure out a lot of new things. So it's a treasure trove of data.
Well, in our interviews, we also found that was a big point, that the cities going into any negotiations for a smart city, their one marching order is we're gonna house it. We want it in our sphere. We don't want to basically have to go to a manufacturer and say, send us data. So I don't know if that's changed much, but I think it's also a privacy issue. that they want to be able to have legal control over it so nobody, ends up using it for ill-gotten gain.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you. I thought this was a very good talk and a lot of great information here. I want to thank our audience for participating and for the very well thought out questions. And then we will work late this week to get this video posted. We will put it on the NLB website along with the Q&A. And then we will also begin promoting it as well. So thank you all.